Hello everybody, welcome back to Start McCleary Music. I'm Sean, and today we are going to study probably one of another more influential heavy metal band in the United States that started in the early 80s, and that is Metallica. We're going to talk about the band history, talk about the members, talk about their best songs, talk about their albums, talk about their success, and all that good stuff. So, why don't we get started? Metallica was founded by drummer Lars Ulrich, who was born on December 26, 1963, and guitarist James Hetfield, born on August 3rd of 1963. Lars Ulrich was originally from Denmark, who is the son of professional tennis player Torben Ulrich. Lars got into music after going to a Deep Purple concert with his father and a few of his friends after one of his friends couldn't attend. He loved the concert so much that he bought the album Fireball the next day, which resulted in him for having a passion for music. He decided to play drums, and his first drum kit was given to him by his grandmother around age 12 and 13. When he was 16 years old, Lars Ulrich moved to Newport Beach, California in the summer of 1980. A year later, he discovered the band Diamond Head and quickly became a fan after purchasing their debut album, Lighting to the Nations, and going to their concert in London. After returning to California, Lars placed an ad in a newspaper in 1981 looking for other musicians to start a band with him. That's where he met James Hetfield, who replied to the ad, but didn't start the band yet. Lars asked Metal Blade Records founder Brian Slagel if he could record a song with James Hetfield, who was on vocals and rhythm guitar. He accepted. Then, on October 28, 1981, Ulrich and Hetfield officially formed the band that they called Metallica. They got the name from Lars Ulrich's friend who was considering that name, or they were considering another name, Metal Mania, and they picked Metallica. In early 1982, future Megadeth founder Dave Mustaine also replied to the ad for a lead guitarist, and they accepted him. After his hiring, they recorded their very first song. It was called Hit the Lights for the Metal Massacre compilation album. They did not have a bass player at the time, so James Hetfield had to play the bass parts. They had their first live performance on March 14, 1982 in Anaheim, California, as well as hiring their first bassist, Ron McGovney. Their performance was a great success, and they were chosen to be the opening act for the band Saxon. In late 1982, McGovney was fired due to not contributing anything to the band, and then Hetfield and Ulrich went to a nightclub called Whiskey A Go Go, which featured the band Trauma. The bass player that was performing that night was a cool man named Cliff Burton, who were impressed by his performance and asked him to join Metallica. Originally he declined, but by the end of 1982 he reconsidered on the condition that the band moved to El Cerrito in the San Francisco Bay Area. Their first performance with Cliff Burton was on March of 1983 at the Stone Club. Shortly after, they were ready to record their first album, but when Metal Blade was unable to cover the cost, they were forced to look for other options. Concert promoter Johnny Z were impressed by the band after hearing their No Life Till Leather demo and offered a broker deal in New York-based labels, but they showed no interest, so that resulted in Johnny Z to start his own record company called Megaforce Record, and he borrowed enough money to cover the recording budget. However, by April of 1983, Dave Mustaine was fired from the band due to his violent behavior, drugs, and alcohol abuse, shortly before the debut album recording. But then, shortly after, Dave Mustaine formed his own band, Megadeth, as revenge and as a new rival. He was soon replaced by a new guitarist who played for a band called Exodus, Kirk Hammett, soon after. After Hammett's hiring, being impressed by his guitar style, they began to record their first album, which their first album was called Kill 'Em All, released on July 25th, 1983. The album was a breakout success, earning very high critical acclaim and selling 3 million copies in the US. Great songs like Hit the Lights, Seek and Destroy, Whiplash, and Jump in the Fire. And the first time in the charts, it peaked at the US Billboard at number 66. Also, with that album, it started a brand new sound that they technically started that was called thrash metal. The tour lasted from July 27, 1983 to August 30th of 1984. After the success of Kill 'Em All, Metallica was anxious to release their second album, and they actually started recording during the Kill 'Em All tour from February 20th to March 14th of 1984. Their second album was called Ride the Lightning, released on July 27th of 1984. The album had better success than Kill 'Em All did, earning widespread critical acclaim and selling over 6 million copies in the US, peaking at number 48 in the US Billboard. Great songs like the title song, Fade to Black, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and Creepy in Death. The tour lasted from February 17th, 1984 to March 19th of 1985. Despite the shorter span, it had more concerts. By 1985, Metallica was considered to be the pioneers of thrash metal and one of the greatest American metal bands in the 1980s. Following the tour, the band took a break for a year but played a few shows during the rest of 1985, most famous being at Donington Park where they had 70,000 spectators. In late 1985, they were recording their next album. They planned this album to feature more dynamic music and thick arrangements. Metallica delivered a more refined approach and performances compared to their previous two albums, with multi-layered songs and technical dexterity. They did all that with their third album, Master of Puppets, released on March 3rd, 1986. They continued to have success with outstanding critical acclaim, some considered to be Metallica's best album, selling 6 million copies in the US and peaked at number 29 in the US Billboard. They started a new tour called the Damage Inc. Tour on March 27th of 1986. Great songs like the title song, Battery, Welcome Home Sanitarium, The Things That Should Not Be, and Damage Inc. On September 26, 1986, while they were touring in Europe, they disliked sleeping cubicles on the tour bus, and Cliff and Kirk Hammett drew cars to see who gets the bunk. Cliff won the match, and he gets the bunk. And in the early morning hours of September 27th, the bus skidded off the road and flipped on the grass. Cliff was thrown out of the window, and the bus fell on top of him, resulting in his death. They canceled all upcoming European concerts after that. 40 bassists auditioned for the band and picked the one that knew the entire set list, and that was James Newsted. They hired him and played for the rest of the tour that ended on February 13th, 1987. They took another break in early 1988. They started to work on their fourth album. They changed their style a bit with more progressive metal, or with a mix of thrash metal. The topic of the lyrics were political and legal injustice themed with mainly war. That's how they got the name of their fourth album, Injustice for All, released on August 25th, 1988. Once again, the album had critical acclaim, but not the outstanding acclaim like Master of Puppets did. It sold better than the previous albums though, selling 8 million copies in the US and peaking at number 6 in the US Billboard. Great songs like the title song, Eye of the Beholder, One, and Harvester of Sorrow. This was not only the last album to be released in the 1980s, but it was the last album until 20 years later to have the thrash metal sound. The tour lasted from September 11th, 1988 to October 8th of 1989. Next year in October 1990, Metallica went to a one-on-one recording in North Hollywood. By this time, they decided to abandon the thrash metal, speed metal style and to a slower, more commercial, heavy metal sound. But they still want to have the characteristics of a thrash metal sound. They had a difficult production with new producer Bob Rock, so that's why the album took longer than they expected it to. But their fifth album was just called Metallica, but most people would call it the Black Album. It was released on October 12, 1991. The Black Album had critical acclaim with their new sound, and it was Metallica's best-selling album to date, selling 16.8 million copies in the US and 31 million worldwide, peaking number 1 in the US Billboard charts. The album opened with one of their greatest songs, Enter Sandman, which was a concert staple to this day. Other great songs like Sad But True, The Unforgiven, and Nothing Else Matters. The tour lasted from August 1st, 1991 to December 18th of 1992.